Hey, Better Babes. Welcome back to Getting Better. I'm Jonathan Van Ness. This week, we're talking how to improve our relationships with ourselves, with our lovers, with our friends, with people that we're dating, everybody. There's 4 main types of attachment styles, and when you learn them, they can unlock your relationship with yourself and the people around you. So honey, we gotta get the code to these attachment styles so that we can improve our lives. To help us learn about this today, we have Thais Gibson, who's the founder of the Integrated Attachment Theory. She's also an expert on attachment styles. She's incredible, and let's get to our conversation. For people watching the podcast, obviously my hair is half wet. I'm also a founder. I'm testing out a little product today. I'm testing out a little technique, and it required an air dry. So I don't want to scare you, Thais. I don't want to scare anybody, but that's why my hair is like this. So that's not what we came here to talk about. Thais, for our people that are just getting to know you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
So I am the founder of the Personal Development School, and I started that program after being in private practice with clients for about 8 years, and then sort of did both at the same time for a few years. And basically, I really help people with their relationships. So by trade, I'm a counselor, coach, and really dive deep into the neuroscience of relationships and love.
I love that. That's so cool. Okay. So now for anyone who's maybe newer to attachment style or hasn't heard about it, they definitely are newer to the pod because we do talk about attachment style. And I'm a big fan of attachment style. I love Stan Tatkin and the whole anchor, wave, island thing. So in the simplest terms, what is attachment style and why should someone care about theirs?
So in the simplest terms, your attachment style is these subconscious rules that you've learned about love. So these things that you're not necessarily conscious about, but that you've learned in terms of how to give love and receive love, how to meet each other's needs, what to expect in relationships, how to communicate. And everybody should know about theirs because number one, everybody has an attachment style. And number two, if you don't recognize the programming or conditioning that you're operating by in relationships, and especially people around you, how they are operating, then we're gonna have a lot more misunderstandings and frustration. And I often use the analogy that your attachment style is almost like if you sit down to play a board game and you have the rules for Monopoly and I have the rules for Scrabble, and we really wanna play the board game and have fun and we have the best intentions. When we sit down to play, we're gonna have confusion and frustration, even if we don't mean to, because we have a different set of rules.
Attachment style is for romantic relationships, but it's also for friends and for colleagues. Attachment style goes for all relationships. So it's not only romantic love or romantic attachment or even dating. It's much bigger than that. But I do think so many people are looking for relationships, and that's obviously something that drives our culture and drives conversations so much. And what you were just saying brings up for me one of our past guests, Logan Ury, and she's this dating coach and I love her. But she talks about this idea of fuck the spark. Because sometimes the spark is really someone who's unavailable and their attachment style is totally different from yours. And it's literally not good. What the spark that you're feeling is really avoidance and emotional unavailability. What do you think about that? Do you think that's crazy or what?
So I think that there's a couple parts to it. So the first thing is that I'm a big fan of the subconscious mind because it actually drives 95 to 97% of all of our beliefs.
We were literally just learning about this with Melissa Tears. Tell me everything.
So your subconscious mind and unconscious collectively are 95 to 97% of all of your beliefs, your thoughts, your emotions, your choices. And what's really interesting is your conscious mind, your logical thinking self that you think is your identity, your personality, that's only 3 to 5%. And when we go through life, what's really interesting and that plays into this idea of the spark is we are most attracted to people in the long run who make us feel familiar because the subconscious mind equates familiarity to safety and thus survival. And what's most familiar is the way you treat yourself.
That idea that our psyche is made up from the time we're 0 to 7, it's our childhoods are really important with shaping our attachment style. True or false?
True, very true. So here's the thing that's really important about this, and I love this topic, is that 0 to 3, we actually obtain the most of our deep conditioning, but then 3 to 7 or 8, and it's usually because we're like sponges. Most of our brains are producing more alpha.
So does that mean we shouldn't be cussing around 0 to 3-year-olds?
I mean, they don't necessarily understand language at a very young age, but a lot of our conditioning, how we're treated, how we're attuned to, whether or not somebody's present, that has a huge impact because we're like sponges. We're taking in our deepest programming at that time. Primarily because our brain is producing mostly alpha and theta brain waves, which is if you go into a hypnosis session, a hypnotherapist is trying to get your brain to produce alpha and theta brain waves because you're more suggestible. So basically what happens is we're like sponges. We're taking in all of this information at a really young age. And then what I think is really important to recognize is that we're always being reconditioned. Repetition and emotion of things we're exposed to is reconditioning our subconscious mind. So you could, for example, have a child grow up in a really stable home until the age of 8. And then, God forbid, they lose a parent passes away. Well, they could actually then have an insecure attachment style after that because of this big abandonment that takes place. So we can, after that age of 7 or 8, we can still be reconditioned. Things can still shape us. We're being shaped all the time by repetitive experiences that elicit an emotional response. But we obtain our deepest and most intense conditioning at that young age.
And it's almost like maybe it's like the easiest because your brain's just already in that state. Whereas like when you get older, and that's like why, is that maybe why learning multiple languages is like easier when you're a little bit, wow.
It's a big part of it. Absolutely. Yeah.
So you being so well versed in attachment styles in your life, how has that changed the way that you show up in your personal relationships?
Oh my gosh, it's helped me tremendously. So I got into this because I had a lot of healing to do originally and did a lot of really in-depth work, started working with clients, and then met my now husband about going on 11 years ago. And when we met, I was still a little fearful avoidant and he was a little dismissive avoidant. And it was actually because of that relationship I sort of revisited attachment theory. And because I learned it in like first year university at a very high level. But what I got so obsessed with is because I also had a background in hypnotherapy was, well, how can we rewire our subconscious mind to actually change our attachment style? We're not born with an attachment style. It gets conditioned into us through our repetitive experiences. And like, how do we actually change our attachment style? And I had already been working with people on a lot of like reconditioning different beliefs and painful challenges, traumas they went through, things
like
of that nature.
Compulsivities.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, because it's like if we can, like, I mean, I always, sometimes when I get down on myself, I'm like, girl, you quit smoking cigarettes and doing meth. So you can change stuff. Like you've changed 2 really hard things. So and I'm just like, wow, that's like really hard. So it's like, that's so true. If we can like quit doing things, we can probably like start changing our attachment style. So if you're like avoidant or if you're like really insecurely attached and kind of annoying because of it, you could like get more secure.
100%. Yeah.
That's fun.
And that's actually, it's interesting because I actually got into this whole like line of work because originally I was addicted to opioids. I was addicted to painkillers from like just before I turned 15 till almost 21 years old. And I got really into like the neuroscience of how we change and heal and transform our neural networks and like how to break habits. And that was so helpful for me. And then I worked with people for a little bit in that period and on those types of things. And then for some reason, just really got into attachment theory after talking to my husband about it, seeing massive changes in our relationship, and then started being like, well, why don't I just apply what I know over here about how to transform our subconscious minds and our patterns into relationships? And then that just ended up being the field I've been in for the past 10 years or so since.
Okay, let's get everyone on the same page though really quick because maybe some people don't know what the attachment styles are. So can you walk us through the 4 main attachment styles as you define them?
Definitely. So your first attachment style is your secure attachment style. The data shows originally that was about 50% of the population, which I find to sort of be on the decline. And a lot of more recent, long-term polls show that that's declining a little bit. What I find to be interesting about it too is that it actually mirrors the divorce rate. And people—
Oh, fuck. That is so interesting.
Yeah. And what's interesting too is people who are securely attached report having the longest lasting relationships. But to me, that's like a small part of the equation. Most importantly, they report having the most fulfillment in their relationships, which I think is really meaningful because I've seen, as somebody who worked in private practice for a long time, you can have long lasting relationships where people are miserable. And I wouldn't necessarily define that as relationship success. Yeah.
Wow.
So we have that. So they make about 50% of the population. Securely attached children grow up in households where they get a lot of what we call approach-oriented behaviors in psychology. So this means it sounds like a small thing, but it has such a big impact. A child grows up in a home where there's, number one, a lot of attunement. And number two, if a child is feeling distressed, the parent is attuned and they actually approach the child to say like, hey, are you okay? They try to soothe the child. They give love and support to the child in those moments. And so this child grows up essentially being conditioned to go, okay, well, it's safe to express my emotions. I'm loved even if I'm having a hard time or a bad day. I'm worthy of love in my good and bad state. So I'm worthy at my core is how I am. And I can rely on people to be there for me. I can trust. And so securely attached children grow up and they also get modeled healthy communication, healthy boundaries, and they basically grow up to then embody those behaviors and patterns as adults.
So I don't have my own kids, but I have like siblings who have kids and I have like friends who have kids. For people that aren't parents, but they want to like, you know, model, like for instance, my friend's kid was telling me about like this like person that they're dating. And I was like, I was like, don't red flag. Don't like say all the things that you're thinking right now. I was like, trying. And also like this, if this kid listens to this podcast, he'd be like, you liar ass. Cause I said every single concern that I have actually now that I'm thinking about it. Every last one. Yeah, I totally did. It's so much so that they actually said like, I shouldn't have told you. So how can we be better about like, so like what should I have done? Just like been like, oh, that's really interesting. Like tell me more about that or something.
It's a really good question. I think the first thing is to validate that person's emotions, right? So hey, how did that make you feel when the person did that? Oh, and did that feel comfortable or safe for you? How did you feel in your body when the person did that thing? So I find that rather than telling somebody that's an unhealthy behavior, that's really bad, get away from that person, because all that does is reach the conscious level of mind for people. And your subconscious is the one running the show. That's why people, by the way, stay in like abusive or unhealthy relationships, because your conscious mind knows better, sees the red flags. Your subconscious mind is like, oh, this is familiar and thus safe. And a lot of times you have core wounds that are like, oh, if I leave the relationship, I'll be abandoned. The painful relationships, it's like an 8 out of 10 pain. The abandonment wound's a 10 out of 10. Let me pick staying in the 8 out of 10.
It's a harm reduction.
Exactly.
And I totally understand harm reduction.
Yeah, exactly.
So we need to be more compassionate with our friends, but also while setting like good boundaries or whatever.
And the subconscious mind speaks in emotions and imagery, not language. So if I say to you, okay, whatever you do, do not think of the pink elephant. You probably flash an image of a pink elephant.
Yeah.
Your conscious mind hears do not. It speaks language. Your subconscious speaks in emotion. So when we say to somebody, get out of the relationship, don't do that, that's just language. But if you say, hey, how did that make you feel when they did that? What showed up for you in that context? You know, that behavior when they spoke to you that way, what did you feel in your body? We're actually getting it to land at a deeper level for somebody. And then they have perspective to kind of come back to themselves and see how things are impacting them. And that's a good place to start, at least.
That's so good, because it's like in yoga, we say, like you're your own best teacher. And so like allowing someone to be their own best teacher versus like you. And it's really funny that we're saying this, because when I was talking to this like teenager that I was talking to about, because she was like telling me that like she's talking to someone, and then I had like all my opinions and I said everything. I literally said to her, well, I'm really saying all of this because like I have all this trauma around like dating and this and that. So I just want to make sure that you don't make the mistakes that like I made. But it's so interesting because like I had to learn that and I had to learn those lessons. So like that's really not going to land on her in the same way. So that's so important. So younger kids, like if you have like your younger nieces and nephews, we're giving like holiday era, we're giving like, and actually it's not even if it's holidays and family time, there's always family stuff. If you're not like a parent and you're not like, because I don't know about Dora and these kids. How do you model like secure attachment, even if you maybe see the parents doing stuff where you're like, oh, fuck, are they going to have like attachment style wounding now? Like, how can you be like a good, stable source for like the young ones without stepping on parents' toes and like also not fucking them up by like modeling not secure attachment stuff?
Yeah, it's a really great question. One of the best things is attunement, being present, because it actually helps us co-regulate. When somebody's attuned to us, it helps us feel like we're safe in their presence. Our nervous system entrains with theirs, and we feel like we can be open and vulnerable. And so attunement is absolutely massive. Like your ability to be present, your ability to validate somebody's feelings so they feel seen and heard, helps them also open and be more vulnerable. Your ability to model off healthy boundaries. So to actually show like, hey, no, I don't feel like doing that today, but thank you anyways. Like in an assertive way without having to be angry or frustrated or people pleasing. All of those things show up really well. And then obviously communication is huge to navigate. Oh, hey, when that happened a moment ago, that felt uncomfortable. And to say that to a family member or to model that kind of communication goes a really long way.
Is this like one of the best episodes we've ever done? I'm having so much fun. Okay, so now let's go back into the types, and I'm going to not distract us on the types now. So the first type is
secure.
Okay, we talked about that, and secure is like 50%.
Yes, exactly.
And that happens in households that are more into attunement, more into like alignment. And would you say that like secure attached is kind of like, that's what we're aiming for? Is that like the one that we want to be?
Absolutely. And I would say too, like if somebody hears that they're not secure, that's not like, oh, that's your fault. That's a bad thing. Don't worry. But I just want people to know, like I see sometimes in the attachment world, people go out thinking, oh, this is my attachment style. I'm stuck this way. Or they just label themselves as that. And I think labels are only so helpful as to us understanding that this is a series of patterns and themes and that we can rewire them. Like it helps to identify our themes and patterns. But ideally we're like, oh, well, if we don't like some of these themes and patterns, we can change them. It's not our fault that we had them from childhood, but it's also a responsibility to change them if we want different relationships.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So secure attached. What's the second one?
So second one, you can imagine these exist along a continuum. The rest are insecurely attached. So second one is anxious, preoccupied attachment style. And the anxious attachment style, they grow up in a household where they get real or perceived abandonment. And what that actually means is that you can have a big real abandonment, like a parent leaving the home and never coming back, or a divorce or a parent passing away, God forbid. But what that's going to cause a big abandonment wound. But what's really interesting about trauma in the subconscious mind is that consistent kind of medium T trauma or even small T trauma very consistently across time actually has a similar impact in certain ways on the subconscious mind and nervous system as one big T trauma, because repetition and emotion fires and wires neural networks in our brain. So somebody can have quote unquote perceived abandonment. And what that means is they may have, parents who are very loving, but let's say they're constantly working and it's like love is there, love is taken away. Love is there, love is taken away. Parents are there, parents are gone again for a week working. Or this inconsistency. Sometimes it's even situations where you have a big family with lots of kids and the kids are all competing for attention. And that can cause like, wait, but I need attention again. What about me? And if that's repeated enough, it can have a really similar impact on the brain as a big real abandonment. And so essentially what happens is this individual who's anxiously attached, they constantly fear love being taken away. In other words, develop huge abandonment wounds. And what I found in my practice over time is that there's multiple core wounds. And we created this in integrated attachment theories. It's not just abandonment, but anxiously attached individuals also have big wounds and triggers around being alone, feeling excluded, disliked, rejected, believe that they're not good enough, and often feel this sense of unsafety or unloved if love is taken away. And those end up being their biggest triggers in relationships.
So that's ringing all my bells. So that's definitely what I am. Yeah. Okay, fun. So then what's the next one? And
can I say one other quick thing about, so we found that anxious attachment styles have other patterns. So they also, their biggest needs in relationships end up being for intimacy, for closeness, to feel wanted, to feel prioritized, to feel validated, to feel reassured by people. And those are things that make them feel most loved and connected. And what I find is it's so important for us to also know our needs, because when we know them, we can meet them ourselves, which is a big part of the healing process that we can get into later. And we can request those specific things better.
I'm literally writing a note down. Stand by. Okay, what's the next one?
So the next one is, if you imagine sort of at the other end of the continuum, we have a dismissive avoidance. So dismissive avoidance grow up with what we call childhood emotional neglect. And some people hear this and they think it's like, oh, parents are never home. It has to be this huge thing. And it can be, for sure. It can be like parents are MIA all the time. The kid's left alone after school for hours and hours. But a lot of times childhood emotional neglect is more covert. It can be things like parents are really stable and there's structure, like kids are at school on time and at their after school activities on time, but there's a total lack of attunement. And so when a child is in this environment and they feel sad, and by the way, children are wired for attunement. Children need to feel safe, they need to feel seen, and they actually need to feel special at a young age to feel connected. And if a child is not getting any of those things, then they learn, okay, well, hey, what's wrong with me that I can't get this connection with my parent? Children's minds, as a behavioral development stage, they personalize everything. So the child isn't growing up in a home going, oh, my parent's emotionally unavailable. The child's going, oh, there must be something wrong with me deep down that I can't build this connection that I'm yearning for, that I'm seeking. And so how they cope and adapt to that is just like anxious attachment styles. They try to people please and maximize proximity and get closer all the time. Dismissive avoidance do basically the opposite. They learn to minimize their attachment needs. If they're constantly feeling like that attunement is rejected, they go, well, let me just try to not need anybody. Let me just try to minimize that I need somebody. And it actually makes them feel relief. So that becomes a coping mechanism, a strategy to adapt. And then as adults, dismissive avoidance are the types of individuals that they'll be pretty, open and good at dating in the early stages of relationship, the first, 4, 5, 6 months. But then as things get a little more serious, as they feel more vulnerable, they start to be like, wait, I don't want to feel that vulnerability I felt as a child. I need to minimize my attachment needs again. And in that case, they'll often push away suddenly, have a hard time committing, have a hard time opening up, become more emotionally unavailable. And that's how they cope, essentially.
And then what's the next one?
The last one is our fearful avoidant attachment style.
Okay, let me recap really fast.
Yeah.
Secure.
Yeah.
Anxious. Anxious.
Preoccupied.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so secure, anxious, preoccupied, dismissive, avoidant.
Yeah.
And then
fearful avoidant.
Fearful avoidant.
Yeah. And sometimes you'll hear this referred to as the disorganized attachment style. So this is the attachment style that grows up with chaos. Okay. So chaos is like usually more big T trauma, more consistently over time. And you can imagine as an analogy, this is a really good analogy, although this is not the only thing that would create this. If you have a parent who's in active addiction. So let's just pretend.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah, totally. And let's pretend like mom's an alcoholic. So mom comes home and one day she's drinking and she's in a good mood. And you're like, oh, she's nice and she's loving and she's warm and she's kind of playful and fun. And so a child's like, oh my gosh, connection is safe. Connection feels good. Another day, mom's had, a few extra drinks and she's an angry drunk and she's cruel and she's unpredictable and she's scary. And you're like, oh my gosh, mom is so terrifying. And you have these really extremely negative experiences with mom. Another day, mom's sobering up. And you're like, oh, she's kind of more stable today. She's in a little bit of a better mood. She's okay. Maybe she feels guilty about her behavior. She's kind of kind. Another day, mom's sobering up and she's detoxing and she's in a bad mood and she's having a really hard time.
Shitting her brains out all over the place. Yeah. And there's alcoholic dads too.
100%. And so in these types of situations, a child grows up being like, I never know what I'm going to get. And other examples could be having a parent who's a narcissist, who love bombs one day and is really mean another day. Parents who are in going through a lot of their own issues. Parents who are going through a really bad divorce, take their anger out on the kids, constantly angry, putting the kids in the middle. Any of these types of things where you're like, you just don't know what version you're going to get. And so while the anxious attachment style copes by trying to get closer and trying to maintain proximity, and the dismissive avoidant copes by trying to distance themselves, fearful avoidants end up being like, oh, I need to predict your behavior. I need to become extremely hypervigilant. They notice everything. They notice any micro expression, any change in body language. And they're always trying to kind of predict 3 steps ahead. And I was speaking to somebody the other day and she said,
fuck, maybe I'm that.
I wouldn't be surprised from what you shared earlier, because fearful avoidants have this really anxious side. So they relate to fearing abandonment. And if they're with somebody more avoidant, like a more dismissive avoidant, they lean into their anxious side more. But then fearful avoidants have this really dismissive side where they will also push people away when they feel scared or when they feel too vulnerable. And they pinball back and forth. They're very hot and cold.
Fuck. Can you straddle? Can you be a little bit this and a little bit that?
That's usually when somebody's fearful avoidant. Not always.
Oh, shit. So you're just fearful avoidant.
Not always. But fearful avoidants really have that.
No, I'm actually non-binary. So I actually really am a little bit of all 4, actually. So that's what's weird about me. So no, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. So yeah.
Yeah. And usually what you'll see is fearful avoidants are, if they're I heard you say your husband was more avoidant.
Yes.
And so if you're dating somebody more avoidant, you'll feel like you're more anxious more often. Because you're usually leaning in that side. The more avoidant somebody is, they polarize. But if you date somebody anxious, you'll lean way more avoidant.
Oh my God. I'm a fearful avoidant. I'm not anxiously attached.
And it's common, and because you mentioned earlier about struggling with addiction earlier.
Yeah.
And it's very common because there's more chaos and your nervous system is so used to being in chaos from a young age. It's more frequent that fearful avoidants struggle with addiction at a young age. I was a fearful avoidant, and part of how I got into this work too.
So you mentioned this earlier, but I want to kind of come back to this because I think this is really important in terms of us staying hopeful and positive as we think about this. But attachment styles are shaped by conditioning, meaning our family of origin, the house that we come up in, that first 8 years that we were talking about. It's not something that we're born with. So why is that such a hopeful idea?
Oh my gosh. This is the most important thing about it, in my opinion, is so we don't just identify with this label, is that you can recondition. And this is not even very difficult of a process. This is what I do and see and experience every day. And you can really, truly change your attachment style. So there's a neuroscience of how you can do that. And what we've done is we've broken it into a few major pillars. So one of the first things is your wounds, right? These core wounds and triggers, this fear of abandonment or fearful avoidance also have, so to go back just really briefly, dismissive avoidance, a lot of their core wounds are around being trapped or engulfed, core wounds around being seen as defective if they're too open or too vulnerable. They feel like they're shameful. They're very hard on themselves and critical of themselves, although they're very stoic, so they won't show it. And they also have this fear of being weak if they're vulnerable. And fearful avoidance or disorganized, right? They end up having the anxious wounds, like the abandonment, the alone. They also have some of the avoidant wounds, so they also fear being trapped or defective. And then they have usually a betrayal wound. They're always waiting for the other shoe to drop and kind of preparing in advance.
Oh my God.
And so the first thing is that we can change these wounds. We're not born with them. They get conditioned into you through repetition and emotion over time. And so we have a few pillars of change. One of the core wounds, and I'm happy to actually share like an exercise or something for how to rewire. So we can start with the wounds. So here's the first thing. When you have a wound, it's subconscious. Okay. So nobody, if you have a wound, let's say an anxious attachment style has a wound, I'm not good enough. Nobody wakes up and is like, today I'm going to consciously choose to tell myself all day that I'm not good enough and see how I feel, right? The wound is hosted at a subconscious level. And so we can rewire it, which is so exciting. So there's actually a 3-step exercise for how to do this.
Tell me. What's step one?
The first step is you find the wound and its opposite. So this is the easy step. I'm not good enough. I am good enough. I'll be betrayed. Loyalty can exist. Sometimes people will feel like I am unworthy. I am worthy. I am unlovable. I'm lovable. So you pick your wound and you find its opposite. And step 2 is I don't believe in affirmations because affirmations are language. They're just the conscious mind. They don't reach your subconscious. And so what we do is we find a way to create language that speaks to our subconscious mind. And remember earlier we talked about like, don't think of the pink elephant and you think of a pink elephant. The subconscious mind speaks in emotions and imagery. So we want to take the words of, let's say it's, I'm not good enough, I am good enough. We want to find a way to convert that into emotions and images. And how we do that is through recent memory. It doesn't have to be recent, it can be any memory. And the reason we do this is because memory is a container of emotions and images. Mm-hmm. So if I say to you like, okay, tell me your favorite childhood memory and let's pretend that it was you playing at the beach, and you would see the images of the sand and the ocean. And we've all seen people when they tell an old memory, they laugh or they smile or because we have the emotions still there. So what we do is in step 2, we say, okay, if it's you're working on I am not good enough, you go, okay, I'm good enough, step 1. Now I need memories of times I actually felt good enough, because by eliciting memories, I'm actually eliciting emotions and images. And now I'm using my conscious mind to speak to my subconscious mind. And so in this moment, you might say, okay, well, I was good enough because I was a really good friend last week to somebody, or I'm good enough because I'm healing and I'm showing up and I'm doing the work and I'm confronting hard things. I'm good enough because I'm learning to have harder conversations. So you're picking very specific memories of things that you did that made you feel good enough, or whatever the opposite of your wound is that you're working on. And then what we do is neuroscience shows us that we need enough repetition and emotion across time to fire and wire neural networks that are strong enough to stick. So in step 3, we come up with those 10 memories is what we're looking for. And then we record it down. We record ourselves saying them out loud. And we listen back for 21 days. It takes 2 to 3 minutes a day. And we ideally listen in the first hour that we wake up or the last hour before we go to bed, because just like in childhood, our brain is producing more alpha and theta brainwaves in that time. So we're almost using these techniques to make our subconscious mind more suggestible, and we can rewire these things in the relationship to ourselves. And the last thing I'll say quick is just neural pathways are like muscles. They atrophy over time. So if we're not working on our bicep muscle, our bicep shrinks. Neural pathways are sort of similar in that sense, that if we're not telling this old story of how we're not good enough, or we're instead saying, no, I am good enough. Here's the evidence, the emotion, the images. I get the repetition of it every day for 21 days. I'm actually building new neural networks in my brain across that period of time. And now we'll start to see ourselves through that lens.
So we were talking about earlier about how attachment styles are not just romantic, it's also like friends, colleagues. How else can our attachment styles and kind of like core woundings come out sideways in other relationships past romantic and also with ourselves?
Yeah, I love that. So what we developed over time was that there's 5 major pillars that our attachment style shows up. So the first one is your core wounds and those things that will trigger you. The other is your needs. Like your attachment style will affect your needs, and that really spills into your friends, your family, because each attachment style has unique needs. Like anxious attachment styles, they need more validation, love, connection. Dismissive avoidance, they need freedom, autonomy, space. They actually respond exceptionally well. People don't think this, but it's wild when you see it. They respond very well to when they feel empathized with, when they feel supported, when they feel accepted or not judged, and when they're in a place where they feel acknowledged for their efforts. So if they're trying and you're like, they don't want these big compliments. They don't want like, oh, you're the best partner ever. You're so amazing. But if they're trying and you say to them, hey, I noticed you're really showing up lately. Thank you. That's like, that really lands with them. And so it's interesting because each person has different things that are going to make them feel loved and connected. And then fearful avoidance, they have a little bit of both sides there, right? They have the anxious dynamics where they want to feel there's intimacy, depth of connection, vulnerability. They also want to feel like on the flip side, there is freedom and autonomy. They want their own ability to be autonomous, to be respected, but they also really care about novelty. And they like sort of the spice of life and for things to be changed up a little bit. And they really need trust and stability for a relationship to stay healthy. And so you'll see that needs affect how we give and receive love. And if we don't know our needs, like we can't even tell people what we need to feel connected. And then we're expecting people just as a byproduct to mind read. And so then we get into this kind of funny territory. So it's really important that second pillar is like to know your needs, to learn your needs according to your attachment style. And then you can go share those things with people. You can tell your friends, you can tell your family, you can find creative ways to meet each other's needs in that form. And that's actually what makes us feel the most connected. Or have you ever heard of the 5 love languages?
Yes.
Needs are so much bigger than love languages. They help us so much more. So as an example, my biggest love language is quality time. But when you look at it this way, like one of my biggest needs is emotional connection. If I spend quality time watching like Netflix with somebody, I don't necessarily feel that connected. Yeah, I'm getting quality time met, but it's like you're just sitting watching a show. If I have a meaningful conversation with somebody for like half an hour, I would take that over 5 hours of quality time for Netflix. And that's because emotional connection is a need. It's more specific. It runs deeper. And so when we learn our needs, we learn how we best need to be loved and be connected. And then we have the language, which brings us to our third pillar of healing, to communicate properly. If we then know, hey, this is what makes me feel connected, and we share with each other, we talk about those things openly, we do needs check-ins regularly. Now we have this ability to get ahead of problems and challenges because we're actually proactive about what makes us feel the most loved and seen.
So the 5 pillars, these are about like understanding your attachment style and then changing it, right?
Yes, rewiring it. So we need for each of these things repetition and emotion across 21 days. So what I tell people, which is and important in that second pillar. So we did the core wound pillar, we gave a tool. The second pillar is needs. Actually, what's most important when you're starting with your needs is those are exactly the things you have to first give in the relationship to yourself. Because if we're not giving things to ourselves, we're not actually primed to receive them. Our subconscious mind will reject them. Yeah.
Well, I wrote down this note earlier, and my husband and I have been talking about this in couples therapy. It's like, if I'm having, it's like, where does the line, like, what's the boundary on this is a self-soothing responsibility versus this is like a legitimate need that I need from my partner? And sometimes it's both. Like, sometimes I do need that, like, that reassurance because I'm outside of my window of tolerance. But then that's like me saying, hey, I'm like upset about this thing. I really need to be loved because I'm like feeling really XYZ about this thing. Can you do this calmly and like love me? It can't be, why isn't this like ready? Because like but it's because like I'm not asking for it like kindly, you know? Or like I'm not like voicing my need. I'm coming at it from my overwhelmed, like outside of my window of tolerance place. So I think that's like really interesting that it really does start with you. And it's like really how it's not that your need is not good. It's like, how are you asking for it?
Yes. So, okay. I love this. You're like getting into things that I get into really specifically. So I love that, Cher. That's so good. So when we look at those next 2 pillars, and we actually, the other 2 pillars after that are nervous system regulation and boundaries, but we'll come to that.
Ooh.
So first pillar is your triggers and wounds. Second pillar is your needs. I always tell people to be properly interdependent, you need to be a master of both. So if you are never meeting your own needs, then you'll actually overly heavily rely on somebody else in an unhealthy way. So if you are always so self-critical and you never validate yourself, we tend to outsource the things that we don't know how to do for ourselves. So we'll be like, oh, it's your job to validate me all the time. And then we can't properly receive it because our subconscious mind, it's outside of our subconscious comfort zone. Our subconscious will tend to reject it a little bit. We'll be like, did they really mean it? Oh my God, I need more of it. I give people the analogy, it's like a hole in your bucket. Like somebody pours in the validation and it feels good for a second, but then you're like, but I need more.
Yeah.
But if we know how to self-validate and we actually practice patterning that in for 21 days on a regular basis, then when people validate us, we're like, oh, thank you. It actually feels good. We can receive. And so now we have this ability to both receive from ourselves and receive from others. And whenever we're doing one without the other, it puts too much pressure. If we're never asking for validation, then we also don't know where we stand in the world. If we're only ever asking for validation, never self-validating, then there's an emptiness to it. So we want to be really good at both giving to self and requesting from others. And then that third pillar, and you really just touched on this, is how we communicate. Now, there's some things that different attachment styles do incorrectly when it comes to communicating because we just didn't know at the time. But one of the first things is we call it positive framing. So the difference between saying, you don't care about me, you're never spending enough time with me, versus, hey, I'm feeling a little disconnected. I'd love for us to spend more time together. Can we plan a fun date night this weekend? And one thing gets you heard and another thing does not. Another thing, it's like there's almost no point communicating when you're negative framing. People don't hear you. And so those are those next two pillars that really go together. We have to practice meeting our own needs first, so it gets conditioned into us. We feel comfortable receiving. And then we have to practice how we communicate so that it can actually land with the people we're around.
And I would imagine that's especially important at work.
Yes.
Like the negative versus positive framing. Because if you are... Because my therapist talks to me about this like nonviolent communication, which I've definitely talked about on the podcast before, but really quickly and simply, that's like, and you would do this more with like family or a loved one. It's like, when you do X, it makes me feel Y. So could you please not do X in the future? Like it's like a kind way of communicating. And she always says that in like work, you do like another similar thing, but it's like not as emotion filled because it's like work, but it's like, how can you, but I think because so many people have a lot of like worth and well-being like tied up in their work, that if you are getting to like a core wound there, it's like just positive framing is really gonna, if you're trying to get people to like work better, positive framing is probably better than negative framing.
I love that. So one of there's sort of 4 stops of communication that I find people go the most wrong. And the first 2 are positive framing and then paint a picture. And I actually say at work, we don't say what we feel as much. We just say what we need, because there's not as much vulnerability unless it's a really close coworker, right? And so we won't say, hey, I'm feeling this in this situation. I need ABC. We'll say, hey, I'd love for us to do more ABC. We just go right to that. And then we have to paint a picture for what it looks like. I would see this all the time in my practice where I would see people come in, and I'll tell a specific story. I had a couple come in early days into working with people when I was still learning a lot and in the process. And it was a husband and wife, and the wife said, my husband never supports me. And he said, I'm going to work to be more supportive. They agreed on it. They went home. They came back the next week. Before he even sat on the couch, the wife was like, he did nothing this week. He didn't try to support me. And you see the husband's face, and he genuinely looks so confused. And he was like, I took out the trash every day. I did the dishes. And he started listing off all these like acts of service that he did and all these things around the house. And she was like, I needed you to encourage me. And so support for her meant something different than support meant for him. So I always say, okay, start by and you can do this at work, positive frame, paint the picture. So because if we paint the picture of what the need looks like, we don't fall into the trap of being like, I need more support. And then one person does one thing, it was not at all what we hoped for because we weren't clear and specific enough. So those are 2 really good and I used to actually just get people to sit down, and people can do this at home, is practice like the times you went through arguments, write them out, and then just in a column next to it, be like, how would I positively frame that? And can I be more specific? And if you train your brain across 21 days to just practice positive framing and paint the picture, that becomes your new set point, your new subconscious comfort zone. And that becomes the way you'll start naturally communicating.
So the 3 pillars of healing: know your wounds.
And rewire them.
Rewire the wounds. Know your needs.
Yeah.
Then it's
communication. Then we go into nervous system regulation. So now it's like you're like, okay, I know what my fucking wound is. I'm like rewiring that. I know what my needs are. So I'm like, and then I'm communicating right. But now my nervous system is like, either you crashed out, or hopefully at this point you haven't crashed out yet,
But if you did, how are we rewiring the nervous system?
So we do a lot of things to really increase that window of tolerance. And so some really good things to start are to do a daily practice. And these can be things you know, people might be like, oh my gosh, there's so many things to do at once. I say do them in 21-day cycles, pick one thing at a time. And so the first thing is we want to actually sit and have a regular activity for at least 21 days where we're meditating or we're doing breath work or we're doing things to actually practice being in our body. But ideally, the real work that we're doing from a nervous system perspective is practicing feeling our feelings and getting comfortable actually sitting in them. So there was this fMRI study done, I believe at the University of Bordeaux in France, and they had participants go into these fMRI scanners and recall times that they were really triggered. And what they watch is if you see sort of the brain scan from the top down, it's like you have your neocortex, which has regions like your prefrontal cortex, your logical thinking mind, then you have your limbic system, then you have your reptilian brain. And what they saw is when participants were triggered, all this brain activity drains out of the prefrontal cortex and even areas like Broca's area of the brain, which are responsible for language and processing. And then what they had participants do is in this brain scan, in this fMRI, they had participants, instead of going into the story of what was so triggering, practice actually just sitting in their body, labeling their emotion and labeling the sensations they felt in their body and practice sitting in that. So for example, if somebody had a story where they felt betrayed.
Yes. It has also, it's like another way of like moving past rumination and moving into like making a new, better story for what's next.
Exactly.
Girl, that is so fucking practical. And okay, wait. So nervous system regulation. So is there other ways that we do that?
There's so many different things we can do. Yeah, there's so many. But I mean, it can be everything from doing yoga, light exercise, things that are helping us come out of. So there's sympathetic nervous system, our fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Then there's parasympathetic, which is rest and digest. But we can have two branches of that in a sense: ventral vagal, which is like the social, connectable part, and then dorsal vagal, where we can shut down and go into this like, you know, I used to have clients who would joke that, oh, it's like a dismissive avoidant coma, or fearful avoidant coma, you just unplug and you don't move from the couch and you're in the shutdown state. So there's a whole bunch of things we can do, but you can do things that are to do light movement if you're in dorsal vagal. We can do things where we're, you know, rubbing our legs or our arms to actually try to sort of discharge trapped emotions that we might be feeling after sitting in them for periods of times. We can titrate that. So we can do, you know, some meditation, then we can go into emotions that we might be feeling, somatically process them, and then do things to actually discharge that trapped energy. There's a whole bunch of different practices, but people can kind of pick what they can see themselves sticking to at home.
But I like that what you're saying is that you can work on one of these things for like about 20 minutes a day for like, or no, is that too
21
long?
days.
21 days.
These things can take like, I mean, when you're doing more nervous system work, you can do it in 20 minutes is a really good set point of time. But like the reprogramming your core wounds, things like that, practicing the positive framing and needs communication, that can be so short. That can be something you do for 5-10 minutes a day. Listening back to the recording in the core wounds, that can be like 2 to 3 minutes a day. So these can be really tangible things.
And then what's the fifth pillar?
The fifth pillar is learning healthy boundaries. So all insecure attachment styles have a funny relationship to boundaries. Anxious attachment styles have like no boundaries. Dismissive avoidants have too strong of boundaries. They have to practice making compromises. And fearful avoidants are all or nothing. So they'll be boundaryless and people pleasing until they're mad. And then they'll set really strong boundaries from frustration or anger. And so we want to practice on a daily basis, setting small boundaries, checking in with ourselves. What is my boundary? Positive framing the boundary, doing it early instead of waiting for things to build up. And then doing that practice across 21 days actually helps us embody boundaries at a deeper level.
Fuck. What if you fuck? Because I do notice like a little bit of a pattern in myself of like there's certain like, but maybe that's, I don't know. This isn't about me. This is about us.
Are you all or nothing?
Well, yeah. And I definitely like yes. But I also think that like there's just been some people who I've kind of like moved on from, and then but the people pleaser in me will be like, oh my God, was I too harsh? Was I whatever? But I think sometimes it's important for yourself to like not everyone has to stay in your life forever.
I agree with that so much. I actually think you're raising something so important, which is that, and I always say to people, like we set a deadline with boundaries. So you can start and you want to practice being assertive, setting boundaries in real time. But then you're going to see really clearly who respects your boundaries and who keeps violating them. And then you set a deadline. Like, hey, maybe it's somebody like, you mentioned your father and, not to put you on the spot, but maybe you have a situation where it's an unhealthy person and you try to set boundaries first. You do what you can. Can he respect your boundaries? Can he show up for them? And if the answer is consistently no, we usually set a deadline. I'm going to practice setting boundaries with dad for a month. If he always violates the boundaries, I have my answer that it's not a healthy dynamic. And now we set a boundary with the person instead of just in the situations. And that's where we end up protecting ourselves and being healthier there. But it's always good to practice first. And then if we just see like, nope, this is not a healthy dynamic for me, then we set a boundary that's much bigger.
What's one myth about attachment styles that you wish we could retire forever?
The idea that you're stuck with it for life. People so often are like, oh, this is my attachment style, and so this is what I am. And they sometimes use it as a way to, in a sense, and not, I don't think consciously or intentionally, but sometimes excuse their behavior, And it's because it's an easy trap to fall into. Oh, I'm just anxious, and so that's why I'm behaving this way. Rather than like, hey, I'm anxious, and yes, that's why I'm behaving this way, but these parts of me that are behaving this way need love, need integration, need support, need healing. And when we look at it through that lens, all of a sudden we're empowered to actually do the work and create a way better life for ourselves as a result.
What's one green flag in a relationship in your life that's good for your nervous system?
Oh my gosh, the ability for somebody to actually be present with you, especially around hard conversations. Because the more we learn to co-regulate with people, it's really healthy for our nervous system, especially in our closest relationships. So when somebody can be present, hear you out, validate your feelings, hold space, then we actually learn to be able to work through conflict in much healthier ways with others.
For listeners who feel ashamed of their attachment style, like I'm too needy or, oh my God, I'm anxious or I'm too cold, what reframe could you offer that they can see themselves with more kindness?
I love that. I think the first thing is that compassion, self-compassion is actually one of the cornerstones of healing. It's part of why we do the reprogramming, because when we have those triggers, our triggers sponsor all this crazy internal dialogue. So if you believe you're not good enough, you think thoughts like, I'm not smart enough, I'm not interesting enough, I'm not funny enough. And it goes into this sort of tailspin, which then in turn will put you into hyperarousal and cause your nervous system to go awry, right? The core wounds are sometimes the source of why our nervous system gets so dysregulated. But so compassion is huge, but also I often tell people, hey, go sit with yourself for a minute and look back at like, well, if the thing I'm judging myself for is maybe I'm too clingy, go look back on like, well, what did the child me experience to become that way? And what it teaches us to do is to sit and actually see our inner child and see, oh, well, I constantly felt like I was fighting for attention, or I didn't get my needs met, or maybe you grew up in chaos and a lot of hardship. And like, when you see yourself in that child version of yourself, you'll realize like, none of my patterns are my fault. They are my responsibility as an adult, but they're not my fault. I got conditioned with things I did not volunteer for. And I think having that compassion is huge.
I feel like that was maybe some of our best work ever, you guys. That was like so good. Thais, I had so much fun. And not only did I have fun on that, I really feel like my husband's absolutely going to have to listen to this episode. And I think that I just want people to get so much out of this. I have more questions, and also our listeners have some attachment style questions. So if you're vibing this and you do not want this conversation to be over, don't fret. Head over to our Patreon for French Kitty Corner and listener questions. We'll see you over there on the other side. But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining this week's episode of Getting Better. Hope this year's treating you well. I hope you're taking good care of yourself. And Thais, thank you so much for coming on. And also, before I let you go, where are you the most active on social if people are just like, oh my God, I need more of this? And where can people consume all of your things?
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me. And I am on YouTube. So Thais, Thais Gibson -- Personal Development School, and at Instagram at the Personal Development School.
Yes. Okay. We're going to put all of that in the episode link of whatever you're watching this or listening to this on. I think you need to just keep making all your stuff. I love you so much.
Thank you. I love being here with you. I'm so honored to be here.
Thank you, honey.